Hey folks, the following is a conversation between myself and Lane Walter of Colorado. Lane has very good tabs on what's going on in Colorado in terms of the over-the-counter archery going to draw. And what we talk about is really, a bit of a debate, right, between what's going to happen with non-resident tags versus resident tags. Are they all going to go over the counter, or should they all go over the counter, or should just non-resident tags go to the draw and the residents retain over-the-counter opportunities? We also hit on a bunch of other political topics going on in Colorado that will interest all you guys, regardless of the type of hunting you do. So let's dive right in. If you enjoyed this content, do me a huge favor. Subscribe on whatever platform you consume it on. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever works for you guys. Everything else is on my website, pursuitwithcliff.com. Go there and it's going to be very apparent to you that I work my ass off just to not have a real job. All the hunts I guide, all the seminars I put on, all the unique experiences I offer, and the membership site, all the details are there. I'll have some cool new merchandise, shirts, hats, all of that coming out soon in the next couple months. So get on there and subscribe to my email list. I'll put out the details there. But enough with that. Let's get to the episode. I just want you, because you're probably more in the know than I am, give us what's going on in terms of over-the-counter archery in Colorado, and then what the different options out there, what this could look like in the future. So just dive right into that, man.
Yeah, so we're currently going here in Colorado through the Colorado Parks and Wildlife is doing their 5-year big game season structure. Every 5 years, Parks and Wildlife will bring the staff together and they bring in outside people to look at it, and they try to just decide what major changes they want to make for the wildlife. And down at the core of this is supposed to be for the wildlife and what's best for them, and then how the hunting is going to impact that and have an effect on the North American model of conservation. So we're in the middle of that right now, and it actually started last year. Colorado Bowhunters Association has had meetings with them. Other groups have had meetings with Parks and Wildlife staff, and staff came together and they put out earlier this month their recommendations for the 5-year big game season structure. And in that recommendation is there's some big ones to note. The one that specifically for over-the-counter archery elk is that the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, it's number 6A, if you go through and you read that, is going to be the alternative 6A1 is that they're going to recommend to get rid of all over-the-counter archery elk tags, go fully limited, fully draw for everything. Alternative 2 is to keep over-the-counter archery elk licenses for residents, but then limit them for non-residents. And then there's 3, which is status quo. The recommendation from Parks and Wildlife staff is to and status quo is always kept in there, but it's not really one of the alternatives for this one. Staff has made it very clear, no matter what, non-residents are going to be limited on this. So now we're just trying to get to a spot where we're trying to save something that we think should be able to be saved for the residents, if that makes sense, which is alternative 2.
Let's dive into that real quick, Lane, because a lot of my viewership is non-residents. And just so everybody knows, I think in this interview with Lane, I'm gonna try to be more of take the position of a non-resident, because I think it'll end up being a much more useful conversation. I'm gonna try to look at it from that perspective. I've hunted a ton of elk in Colorado as a resident, so I understand that perspective. I was an outfitter there, so I get that perspective. Outfitters tend to be, I think in general, a little biased towards non-residents or supporting non-residents because that's their source of revenue. But in this conversation, I just want to, take the side of the non-resident, right? So, back to these 2 alternatives, Lane, there's for sure going to be a change, is basically what you're saying. Now, you said something in that introduction I think is really interesting. You said that non-residents are going to be limited either way, right? So can you
either way they're limiting them?
I think this is a really important thing to dive into and make sure people understand. Can you explain that a little bit? And if we're going right down the same train of thought that I'm thinking, it has to do with the cuts, right? The cuts of the tags, non-resident, resident, or does it not? Go ahead and explain to me.
So I think the biggest thing, it's come down to a social issue with the if getting into a little backstory with Colorado in 2019, then Colorado Parks and Wildlife cut out almost 40% of the over-the-counter tags, and they made them full draw. They're like, hey, these elk herds are hurting. We think this is going to be the best for the wildlife. Totally support that. They made those cuts or those changes, and they thought that the hunters that had been hunting those units were going to stop hunting over the counter and just keep hunting those units. Well, what ended up happening is the next year, more people bought over the counter elk tags than they ever have before. And they got pushed into 60% of the units now. So we sold more than we ever have in the past, and they're put into a much smaller area. And so that created this overcrowding issue overnight. I mean, it was already there. People were already kind of complaining about it and stuff, but it's like my definition of crowding is going to be different than your definition of crowding. When I'm out on an over-the-counter rifle hunt, I just expect to see another hunter out there. There's jokes about the big orange army. It's kind of for archers when I guess the expectation is you're not going to see a lot of people because not as many people are supposed to be doing it. So I do think there's that underlying issue there as well. But overnight they created this crowding issue by cutting out almost 40%. And I tried to find the numbers right before this and I couldn't because I would love to have it. But it was a significant amount of units were turned into draw only, but then those people weren't applying for those units to hunt them. They just decided to go hunt somewhere else and over the counter.
Yeah, and I
so
saw
overnight we had this crowding issue.
Right, and I saw that like the last year of my outfitting or running my outfitting business is I had I bordered a unit that went over the counter, and then we stayed over the counter in my primary unit, and for sure, like drastic influx, in the over the counter unit. So yeah, I saw for sure what you're talking about. But Lane, just so because I want to exclude this because maybe I'm just confused on it. But when we look at the alternatives, if it goes over, like all the units go over the counter or all the units go draw for both non-resident and residents versus if they only go draw for non-residents. What's the do you know the breakdown of how many non-resident tags are gonna hypothetically disappear or on between the two alternatives?
So in that, and you could dive in deep and talking to some guys from Parks and Wildlife staff, they want to make it a very small reduction off the bat. And they said about 10% of the tags of what the traditional over-the-counter tag sales have been is what they want to kind of cut down on. It's not going to be a huge decrease, but they just want to start out at 10% and see what that does. And kind of like, and I think they're playing it right and they're playing it safe by saying, hey, let's start small. We don't want any big major shifts in tag sales and allocations and stuff to see what happens. I think that honestly, if they were just to come in and just put a cap at it right now, that way it's not getting worse because every single year we're selling more tags, it seems like. And so if we could at least just put a cap on it somewhere, and I think that's kind of what both of these alternatives are going to do. If you look at it historically in the past 10 years, resident over-the-counter elk tag sales have declined by 20%, but non-resident tag sales have increased by over 28%.
Right.
So you have this crowding issue. That's the main driver behind a lot of this is that people are complaining about feeling overcrowded and worried about what it's going to be doing to the elk herds and stuff. So trying to figure that out and trying to cap that the way other states have is, I guess, the main goal on this.
Yeah. And dude, we could dive into like a whole nother conversation about that. I think that in itself is pretty interesting, Lane, that this is all focused on overcrowding. You know what I mean? Or like, or it's a quality thing. Well, I want you to comment on it, man, from your year's experience, your experience archery hunting in Colorado. Do you think that it's that part of the quality and the crowding is somewhat correlated to a reduction in elk in a lot of these places? Or do you feel like it really is primarily a crowding issue?
When you say reduction of elk, I mean, our elk herds are still very healthy. They're almost exactly where Parks and Wildlife want them to be. Are they a little bit lower than what they were 10 years ago? Yes, because Parks and Wildlife wanted them reduced a little bit more. So they offered more late season cow hunts, all that. I think a lot of it has to do with the reduction of elk is elk being pushed into different places than where they were. And getting completely honest with it, I think Onyx has changed the game on this. I think all these people getting into these different kinds of hunting and having more confidence to go to places where they wouldn't go before, to where now I can be like, hey, I was hunting back here 18 years ago and never saw a soul. Now there's 20 camps back here, and that's not exaggeration. That happened to me a couple of years ago. I
Right.
set up in this spot 10 miles deep, and there's 20. Dude, one couple had a 2-month-old baby back there. And it's like things have changed. And
Yeah,
this
sure.
isn't just because of non-residents. It's everything in Colorado has changed. Look at our population growth. Look at the outdoor activity. Those people weren't hunting, by the way. They're just back there backpacking, camping with a 2-month-old,
Right.
in the middle of September, because Colorado has changed. Our population has changed. We've had so much growth in this state, and so many people move in here that love to do the outdoor activities, that has changed as well. So as far as elk getting pushed, I think that's what has a lot more on it than just like the elk herd going down by what, 30,000.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, because I agree with you in a sense, Lane. I think there's, well, this isn't disagreeing with you, but from what I observed is that there's spots where there was for sure a reduction in elk over like my decade of guiding there. For sure, there's numbers down, but you bring up something that's really interesting, is that you can have, well, before I say this, one of my thoughts, man, and this is for sure from being in the business, is that I've dealt with situations where a lot of archers were in a drainage, but the elk were there, right? Or at least they were there for a while, right? And they could have been, if I had several drop camps in a drainage, I put guys in there, and I had, guys all spread out. We tried to kind of factor that in, make sure they weren't overlapping. If there weren't a lot of elk in the drainage, all of a sudden they felt like they're real competitive, right? Like, oh, I'm competing with your other drop camp, or, or there's just too many people in here. And there's between, your drop camps and the public, there's too much crowding, right? And I would hear it over and over, just from a business perspective, right? And I'd have to deal with that because it does affect the quality of the hunt. Now, if I did the same scenario and I put them in there and there's a bunch of elk in the drainage, nobody said anything. You know what I mean? Everybody was like happy, right? So I have this.
This is awesome.
Yeah. So there's always like a part of me that's like, and we're going to dive into, the nitty gritty of this, but there's always a part of me that's like, man, would more elk solve the problem? You know what I mean? But you bring up a good point. Like the numbers suggest that there's not that. It's that can't account for the big quality, the perceived quality of the hunts, all of it, right?
Yeah.
So it's go ahead.
No, there's so much that we could get into on that, with going back to like what they proposed as well, and what I'm worried about with the 2019 tag shifts, where they cut out 40% of the tags and the people just kept going with over the counter. In this proposal, they're proposing to keep over the counter rifle tags for elk for second and third season. I am really worried that is going to put a huge shift of these people that can't get an over the counter elk tag now for archery just to rifle, because I want to elk hunt. And if that happens, I'm really worried that the exact same thing, that history is going to repeat itself. And that now, hey, we're going to cap these archery tags. You're not going to be able to get it. I'm just going to go buy over-the-counter rifle. And I'm really worried about what's going to happen to over-the-counter rifle seasons. And then we're talking about people shooting high-powered rifles 1,000 yards nowadays. Some people doing it more than that shouldn't be. And you want to talk about like a safety issue. That is one of my main concerns on the backside of this. If we're going to do one, let's at least do them all. Parks and Wildlife right there. I think during the last commission meeting, if you look at the last like 2 minutes of Matt Eckert's testimony, he brings it up and he paints it really clear. And I know Parks and Wildlife hates it when people say this, but he says that we have to protect the revenue source that we've created. And it's like, so they don't want to cap it. But once again, if we just capped it where it's at, no one's saying cut out like a huge, no one's saying cut out. Well, some people are saying cut out, 80% of them, blah, blah, blah. Just put a cap on it somewhere where it's not going to get worse. Right.
Yeah. And I think
that is what we've advocated for from the beginning. Is just a cap, right? So it doesn't get worse.
Yeah, and I think honestly, Lane, even from a non-resident's perspective, it's very hard to argue against that. If you're from wherever, Missouri, Ohio, or whatever, and you've been archery elk hunting in Colorado for the last 20 years, unless you just got a spot that has been, somehow you've been able to keep secret, 99% of those guys have seen the crowding issue occur. And I think most of them could agree, like, hey, Colorado probably should not sell any more tags. Like the flow variable should be set. So I don't think there's much disagreement with that, dude. Now,
Yeah.
your point on rifle tags is really interesting to me, man, because you can probably tell like where this conversation is going. I might disagree with you a little bit on it with you and the CPW on the status of the elk herds there. And again, that's very idiosyncratic to some of the herds that I dealt with. Like that Vail Valley herd has got the shit beat out of it in my view.
Yeah.
But so from my perspective, even though it's not in the notes, it's not like a primary concern. I think populations, like in my view, it's like, hey, if you're going to reduce the tags, it should also be partly about, protecting, this golden goose of the elk herd, right?
It 100% should be about
right.
protecting the golden goose. And
Right.
I said this 3 years ago when I ran that Senate bill, that you are going to, like, if this is a lake, you have the dam flowing out and you're taking all this money now. And pretty soon there's going to be no water in the lake, and that's going to hurt everybody. So let's make the hard cuts now and just cut it just a little bit now so we can keep the lake full. I was told, oh, we're gonna make these changes. Don't worry about it. We're gonna make these changes. It's gonna happen. And they opened it up even more.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, though, man, is like you bring up this deal with rifle, and I never haven't even thought about this, Lane. But like, what you're suggesting is that archery, some of the demand from archery is going to go to rifle. We all know. I mean, you know what the success rates are on archery. So even if they, if that transfers to rifle, it's actually going to end up being more dead elk in Colorado, which to me, is like makes zero. I mean, that's like the last.
There is one thing, and
go ahead.
Brian from Parks and Wildlife has pointed this out to me. He makes a really good point. The difference between over-the-counter archery and over-the-counter rifle. Over-the-counter rifle is bull only, and there's a point restriction in there. So you have to have 4 points on one side, right? So you're not going to be able to go in and kill all the cows, but you're going to put a hurting on those mature bulls that are breeding.
Yeah.
And a 4 point,
that's a good point.
A branch antler bull will be able to breed, right? Like it's usually a 3-year-old bull or older. But you got a freak genetic one that's going to be a stud, and a cool bull and one that's strong. We want its genetics going on. And in year 2, he's got that eye guard coming out. Someone's going to blast him. And that is going to increase 100%. We're going to have our bull to cow ratio is actually going to get pretty jacked up. If that were to happen, in my opinion. I'm not a biologist, but it's pretty easy to see.
Well, yeah, dude. I mean, and again, man, I gotta just reflect on the areas that I hunt, Lane, and I'm sure some of those may overlap between me and you, and then some probably don't or whatever. But the legal bull ratio to cows is pretty low. You know what I mean? Like we already.
Yeah, but the whole herd's getting pushed, and that's what I really have always tried to push. Like, hey, just because they're only shooting, those elk don't know who's getting shot at. They hear a gunshot go off and they're running, and then they're getting pushed on the private land, and then those private landowners have deprivation tags and they're shooting everything. So that has always been my argument to it. I do like to point out that, hey, it's only branch antler bulls, but when you're talking about bang sticks going off and pushing the elk, there's a certain commissioner that always talks about how this 20-year-old plus 24-year-old study talks about how back in the day, archery elk hunters were responsible for about 20% of the elk getting pushed onto private land during elk season for archery elk. And they're like, well, that's the only thing we control. So we're going to try to control that. And so that's always been their argument, this 20-some-year-old study. Saying it's like, how much has changed in Colorado in that 20 years for one? Like, how many just hikers I see back there. And last time I was packing out, not the last time I was packing out elk, but I was packing out an elk a couple years ago, and I ran into everybody coming off the trail in the middle of September
Oh
were
yeah.
just people up there hiking,
Sure.
just all hikers, all of them really cool too, by the way. Thought it was awesome, which I
Yeah,
would love
but
to point out because it seems like there's always like this friction there. No, they're
yeah.
great people. They're like, holy cow, like you look like you're going through hell, and I was,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like
Yeah.
packing out a mature bull. But at the same time, that's who I was running into. I wasn't running into other hunters.
Yeah, yeah, and that's yeah. So what you're saying is like it doesn't really matter, if it's the archers or not. There's activity up there anyways, and the elk are
Yeah,
gonna
and
the
it's
elk are
getting worse. It's just
yeah,
our population is growing, and it's just getting worse. And
yeah,
not that it's a bad thing, but
right. But the elk are gonna habituate to that or they're gonna move. It doesn't really matter like the
yeah,
fluctuation, the population of archers. I gotta ask, man, not to be like bouncing around topics, but
yeah.
I know you've been in the meetings. Has anybody brought up like I view it as the most anti-archery study back in the day about how all the archery pressure was affecting how many cows were getting bred. Have you heard this one?
Oh yeah, yeah, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
part of it. So there was two different studies. There's the study I was talking about and that one. It's like that is so biased. That is so like insane. But
That-
that this certain commissioner leans on it really hard
dude,
all the time. It's like, hey, that once again, we're talking about a 25-year-old biased study,
yeah,
right?
it's
Like
it's a horseshit concept, man. Like not I
it
mean,
really is.
I really don't like and it's an older study. I don't know the people who did it. I don't mean to like talk negative. I don't think that their conclusions in the study were meant to be used with like the certainty that a lot of people use that study. So
I think it was personally. I think it was used a lot more to try to get rid of archery hunting.
yeah. So this is an interesting one. I think it'll be interesting to people watching this. Lane, tell me if this has been a while since I've read it or heard it. So tell me if I just stop me if I'm saying anything incorrectly. But the general concept with this study was that archery was increasing quite a bit during this time. I don't know if it was in the San Juans or whatever, some big elk herd. We're starting to see a lot of more archery pressure, and then calf ratios were going down. And so they were trying to figure out why that was. One of the things that they tried to claim was that because of all the archery pressure during the rut, the cows were actually just not being bred because they was so disrupted to the rut. The cows weren't bred, so you ended up with lower calf ratios after calving season, not because the calves were born and then disappeared. They were just never born, right? Is that is
Yeah.
and so
That's about what it was, but they're not like that study, like I said, going into a little biased in my opinion,
yeah
wasn't going into that was less than 10 years after we got rid of our spring bear season and our bear
yeah
population was going through the roof. And if you look at studies that show what black bears do to Colorado's elk population and the calf recruitment in areas where they're overpopulated,
sure
they're taking out in some areas, it's over 40% of the calves are getting killed by black bears as soon as they hit the ground.
oh
And so
yeah
they weren't looking at any of that stuff because they didn't want that information in there. They were just trying to blame something. They had something that they, in my
well
opinion,
yeah
the way the study went, they had something they wanted to blame it on. And then they just found data that kind of supported that while leaving out the rest of the important stuff.
yeah and the
And they're like,
thing
this is why we have poor calf recruitment.
yeah
It has nothing to do with our overpopulation of black bears and predators, guys, by the way. That could possibly have anything to do with it. It's got
right.
to be something else.
Well, and the thing that's crazy about Lane is it's a fairly easy thing to have tested, right? You could have preg checked the cows, right? It would have been
Yeah.
costly to do it or whatever. You could have actually preg checked the cows. In it, from my understanding, that was never done as part of this deal. So they couldn't exclude that the calves were born, and then as you say, most black bear predation is like it's in the first like 3-4 days because they just
Yep.
they kill them before they can get up or before they're moving around a lot, and they hit them like
Yep.
I mean I'm with you on that. Like I've seen black bears work in elk calving grounds during that period of time, so they didn't exclude that, and they could have and
Easily.
then the other thing, man, like I don't know your background, but I grew up in a livestock family. The concept that a bunch of guys hunting elk during the day stopped bull elk from humping every cow in estrus at night is hilarious to
Oh,
me.
dude.
dude. Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah, because
like
that's when they like to rut, by the way.
yeah,
Like, I
oh
mean,
yeah,
like
that's
that's why
most
we like to
activity.
hunt first thing in the morning and right before dark, because that's when the activity is the most, because
Yeah,
it's cooler. That's when they're out moving around. That's why hunting during a full moon kind of sucks. Like
yeah, yeah,
I
oh
don't know
yeah,
if you've ever been out, like I'm sure you have, out hunting in the middle of the night. You just hear elk bugling. You get out, you pull out your binos, and you're just watching just the coolest thing you'll ever experience, man.
yeah, oh
I'm
yeah,
pretty sure I had an elk try to hunt my tent one night because it was
yeah.
looking for just something that was,
Well, yeah, and so just without even studying it, it's like, dude, that's just
yeah,
probably not a feasible idea that
yeah.
archers are
But they
doing.
are putting so much emphasis on that even now. I think it's
That's
24 years
wild,
if I'm
man.
right. Like later, it's
Yeah,
like, come on, guys. Like, can we have something else that we're going off from? But they're just grasping onto straws to try to.
yeah,
In this last meeting, another thing that's proposed in this 5-year big game season structure is the CBA wanted the archery deer season to be start August 15th,
yeah,
align with
sure.
antelope,
Yeah,
and then end 30 days later. We didn't want it to go as long as archery antelope. We just wanted the season dates moved up.
yeah,
One, to take pressure away from some of the crowding that's happening during elk
yep,
seasons. Two, make it's good. It would have been better for everybody. So Parks and Wildlife staff looked at it. They said, hey, what if we just made a new season that would take out some of the tags from the other ones, but so they're not giving away any extra tags, but it was going to start August 15th. And one of the commissioners said that they didn't want deer being hunted during the rut when, yeah. So we got that going for us.
hold on, dude. So we have to die. So this one actually depresses me a little bit,
So
Lane.
this is going
I
into the
so
grasping at straws stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah,
when one of the Parks and Wildlife biologists got in there and said, "Hey, we just want to correct you that the rut actually happens during fourth rifle, and they just get hammered,
yeah,
not during archery, and it sure as heck wouldn't happen during August."
yeah,
Then they said, "Oh well, then we don't want people hunting them to try to harvest velvet. They're just like
yeah. Okay,
grasping at
yeah, just
straws
yeah,
to not
okay,
have it."
yeah,
And then
yeah,
it's like, well, there's not a market for that. Then they said, well, I just don't want them competing with the other hikers in there.
yeah, yeah.
But
So
like going into the grasping at straws, that's like what it seems like on there. It's like, but that's who's making our decisions on these.
no, I totally understand what the point you're making, man. But I got to dive into this, and then I want to focus on Elk Lane because this one really bums me out. And I'm glad I had you on because you have a better pulse on what's going on. I'm just reading the document. You know what I mean?
Yep.
The notes.
Yeah.
So I read the document on the August 15th deer hunt, which, dude, like 10 years ago, I actually pushed for the same thing. I don't know if
Yep.
it's ever come up, but it has been proposed a long time ago
Yep.
to
Yeah,
start.
5 years ago. The only reason it didn't happen 5 years ago in the last 5-year big game season structure is for some reason the heads of Park and Wildlife at the time, he just said, nope, I don't want it. We're not doing it. He was
Yeah.
hard against it. Otherwise, it would have happened because the staff recommended it, I believe, last time.
Yeah, I wonder, and this is like total speculation, Lane. I wonder if there might be an issue with a lot of that stuff would be high country stuff, and they're concerned about extending their enforcement season. I mean, antelope's one thing for like the wardens to have to deal with, but dealing with
Yep.
not you got high country deer hunters and that sort of thing. I'm totally speculating, man, but I wonder.
Although they've
Did
talked
they?
about how it would extend, yeah, how it would put
Okay.
more stress on them because they're extending the enforcement season. But it's like, well, it actually, you're not, instead of trying to 100 guys focusing on 100,000 people, you would have 100 guys focusing on 20,000 and then 80,000. It actually would make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, like kind of spread out the
Yeah, you'd be
effort
spreading
with
it out. Yeah.
No, I see what you're saying, but the thing is, dude, it's like I read the alternatives and I thought the staff recommendation on this was to do it.
It is. It's the commission that's fighting it, and the commission
Oh.
making there's two commissioners. They're like, I don't like it, and when asked why, then because of this, and because of this. And I actually, one of the commissioners that was against it, that actually made the comments about the rut. I actually love the conversations that we have together
Yeah.
because he's very willing to say, hey, I'm not 100% educated on this. What am I missing?
Yeah.
The other one, not so much. But like at least he was like, oh, I guess I would. And he right up in the meeting, he was like, you know what? I was misinformed. I'm wrong. I'm going to take another step and look back at this. So at least we have that person in there, right?
Yeah.
Um,
He was
but
like, he was willing to, he was,
he always has been willing to be like, you know what? I thought I knew. I
yeah,
didn't. I'm going to re-educate myself and come
yeah.
back on this.
Yeah, it's.
So
I
at
mean,
least we have that.
like when I mean, it's from a hunter's perspective. It sounds like how could somebody be, so idiotic that's on the wildlife commission? But the reality is that people on this commission that it's set up to have people that are from that are advocates for non-hunting groups, right?
Yeah, he's not
Yeah,
one of the
yeah,
sportsman's
yeah,
representatives.
yeah,
He's actually representative. I couldn't, but yeah, we only have 3 sports people representatives on the commission. The rest of it has to do with like outdoor recreation and a lot of other stuff to go into it. So there's
right.
only 3 that should be educated like fully on how this works. And one of them right now just didn't get confirmed. He actually pulled his name out that I think personally wouldn't have been horrible to have on there. I like the
Okay.
conversations I had with him. His name was Skyba. He worked for Parks and Wildlife for I think 25 years before he retired, went and did something else, came back, and just made some comments that, in my opinion, got twisted, and he didn't make it on. So now during this 5-year
he wasn't the guy who self-resigned, right?
he is.
He is.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's because during the hearing with the Colorado State Senate, like a bunch of stuff was brought up. Words were twisted a little bit. He did have a lot to do with the wolf introduction. Yeah. So a lot of sports people were against that. Just personally, my interactions with him, I felt like he wouldn't have been the worst pick that we could have had. So, yeah, dude, right now we have a vacant seat, and then we have one that's representing and I believe it's statute that one has to be to represent the Outfitters Association. She's been on there forever. One of the most seasoned. And then the other one is a brand new commissioner as well, not super well versed in it. So out of the 3 that we're supposed to have, we have one that really knows what they're talking about it extremely well because she's been in it long enough to where she's learned. And the other guy, great dude, willing to learn, putting in a ton of time and effort. But like, if you get on that commission, dude, you're drinking from a fire hose, because if I got put on that commission and all of a sudden I had to make a rule about paddle boarding, I'm going to be like,
yeah, sure.
I don't know squat about paddle boards, guys. Why am I voting on this? So then you have to educate yourself. So there's a lot of other stuff they have to be doing. So I'm trying to give them as much grace as I can.
Yeah, dude, it's really it's interesting you brought up the one commissioner that resigned. I'm using the wrong term.
Yeah, he pulled his nomination.
Yeah, he pulled his nomination. Yeah, but dude, that's really interesting because I was either talking to somebody about. I've read the articles. I read his op-ed about it. All of that. Dude, I'll admit to you, Lane, like I've read the guy's background for sure my conclusion is like this guy should not be the hunter's advocate for on the commission.
And I believe there was a lot of stuff that was twisted there because I think would have been a big advocate for Parks and Wildlife staff, and that's where I guess I'm coming from on it, and doing what the North American model for conservation actually is, and doing what's best for the wildlife while using hunters. And I think that in his core, he believed that, and he was willing to put some of his stuff aside for that. At the same time, he was also a guy that loved the wolves and helped with the wolf reintroduction, that. Yeah. I see how that was negative for hunters and how they don't like that, because I'm with you on that. I don't believe that ballot box biology should be used at all. But as far as what I'm worried about is who's gonna be put in his place.
Yeah, it could be
That's
worse.
what I'm worried about.
Yeah, it could be like
it could be a lot worse, man.
Yeah, like
because the commission is 100% appointed. The only way that you can get appointed is the governor has to pick you.
Yeah.
And the governor that we have right now, his husband is a strong anti-hunting advocate.
Right. And like
I'm worried about who the next pick is going to be.
I mean, really, I don't even know legally if he has to justify it for like the sports, this sportsman or hunter seat. Basically, we're talking about him filling. I don't know if what the deal is, if he has to justify it or not. But even if the guy kind of needs to be a hunter, like that's a broad category, dude. Like a guy could have gone pheasant hunting one time and you stick him in that spot. Right?
I think the only qualifier is you had to have bought a hunting and fishing license in the past 3 years.
Yeah.
It's a pretty low barrier of entry, man.
Yeah. So you bring a good point. it could be worse. That's a really interesting one, man. Because yeah, it's interesting to hear your perspective on it, Lane. Is basically what I'm saying, because it sounds like even the media that I consumed on the guy, like my problem with anybody being on that commission, like anybody that's you know, being representing hunters on that commission, if they, in my view, if they have a history of potentially limiting hunting opportunity in Colorado, I'm not for it, you know. And
And I'm 100% with you. But at the same time, when politics come into play, like I would
yeah,
love a hardcore
sure,
person that is supports North American model for conservation, doesn't want ballot box biology at all, that like wants to see what Parks and Wildlife staff can do. Like that's who I want there. But
right.
that's fairyland. You know,
Yeah,
that's a
no, no,
dreamland.
yeah.
That's not what's going to happen here.
Yeah, you see the
What not
reality.
with what we
Yeah,
have in Colorado's political climate.
yeah,
It's not.
like,
This isn't Wyoming. This isn't. That's not how we're going to get that. Like
yeah,
this
sure.
is Colorado. We're a deep blue state at this point. We'll be lucky if the next person hunts at all.
Yeah. And from the governor's perspective, that's just tactics, right? I mean, I mean, you know, he's got his own views, you know, and so obviously he's going to use, if it's legal, he's going to use any tactics to swing that commission to what he would like to see. So yeah.
And off air, we could get into what I'm scared of what's going to happen. I just don't want to give anybody any ideas.
Okay,
But
cool.
it could be a lot worse, man.
I got you. It's an interesting side conversation. But we digress, dude. So this August 15th deer one, and then I want to get back to the elk seasons. So your feeling on the August 15th deer is that it's probably not going to happen.
The commissioners that are the way they're talking is they don't, and this gets back into it, like they're worried about it for some reason, and it's because the one person that actually knows about sports people and stuff is saying I don't like it. And so usually that's the way a lot of the commission goes, like, oh, well, you're the expert, you know, cool. But the Parks and Wildlife staff is recommending it. I think it would be awesome because I think it would alleviate a lot of the pressure during archery elk and get away from some of that. I think it would extend my hunting season, so my wife would probably hate it. But other than that,
oh, it's awesome, dude. It's like it's
every other state's doing it too, and I can't say every other state. Wyoming starts September 1st, but other than that, like most states are hunting mule deer archery in November, or I mean in August, the beginning of August.
Yeah, well, and dude, I can only speak for the archery stuff that I did there in September, but I hated hunting high country mule deer after like the 15th of September.
After the 15th, I hate doing it after the 5th.
Yeah.
They usually do. They just dive bomb into that timber, and then you're like, all right, cool, I'm host.
Yeah,
go hunt elk.
Yeah, the minute they strip velvet, you're kind of done. So that's the thing, is that if you're a deer hunter, you know that's your focus. And you know, there's a lot of guys that just want to buck hunt with their bows. They really don't
eat, sleep, breathe buck hunting.
Yeah, they really, in a sense, have a very short season now. And the other thing
what our main point on this too was the way that the new season structure aligns. September 2nd, archery deer opens up, and then you could have September 6th early rifle opening up for deer, high country deer rifle tags.
Mm-hmm.
So you're giving somebody a couple days to get it done with a bow before someone comes in with a rifle and starts shooting at them.
Yeah,
that was one of our main drivers at it. I think Parks and Wildlife staff saw that. It's just the coming down to the commission and getting them to be like, hey, why don't we go with the staff recommendation on this? But it's hard because I'm saying, hey, what I want is the staff recommendation for this, but don't do the staff recommendation on this other one, right?
Yeah, sure.
But it's hard to, like, I know what I'm trying to point out with them is that one was, if you talk to the Parks and Wildlife staff, that was an easy recommendation to make. That was like a 10-minute conversation, and I don't know the exact time, but we'll just say that was a 10-minute conversation. Most people agreed on it. Sweet.
Yeah.
6A, over-the-counter archery elk, was almost a full day discussion for them to come up with it. And I like, nobody took a poll as to whether it was 51 or like 55%, but they barely got above the half mark to make that a recommendation.
Yeah.
A lot of Parks and Wildlife staff wanted the other one. And that's what we're trying to say and trying to point out is like, hey, just because this is the staff recommendation here, it doesn't hold the same weight as this one over here. Like, this was a highly contested, almost took a full day of meetings and people talking for the Parks and Wildlife staff to come up with, 51% of the people, or like just above 50%, said, let's go with it. That's how it got the recommendation. It wasn't like hey, we strongly recommend this one. This is what needs to happen. It's that the loud voices won out.
Yeah, I got
versus the other one, all the staff was like, oh yeah, that'd be pretty easy. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. So I get what you're saying is really on the staff side, this deer thing was like a go. Well, we'll go back to the elk, dude. I wish the August 15th, even if that deer season was just August 15th to September 1st, even if that was what it was limited to, I think
I'd put in for that every year, dude.
Yeah, I think deer hunters would have a ball, you know.
Oh yeah,
I think that's really an unfortunate deal, and this whole crowding thing, like get the guys that just want to focus on deer, get them.
Yes,
you know, I think it's I say we're gonna move on, but I got to get your opinion on this. I think it's so weird when people bring up like, well, you know, the problem is then if I go on my one elk hunt, I can't have a deer tag and an elk tag, and it's like, dude, you're archery hunting, like what do you like? Just focus on one thing, for God's sake, man. Like,
if I'm sitting there bugling for elk, I'm not expecting a deer to walk in front of me. You know, I try not to have this. I've been hunting a late season plains deer tag for the last, few years, just because, just like northeastern Colorado, because that's, right there on the Nebraska border.
Sure.
I can get that late season tag so it doesn't interfere with my archery elk.
Yeah.
I don't want the same one. And I get it. I'm the anomaly, but like, what's the odds that you're going to shoot an elk and a deer on the same trip?
Yeah, I think that's the key. As I think everybody, I think a lot of non-residents in particular, man, they want to maximize their trip. They want to maximize opportunity, have a lot of tags, and so I get it, but I think it's that demand for the multi-species a lot of times is driven by kind of an imaginary expectation. You know what I mean? But before we go back to elk, what's the deal on bears, man? Do you know anything about the non-resident tag price?
Yeah, so in that meeting, they how long ago was it? It was a few years ago. We dropped the price of a non-resident bear tag because not enough bear tags were getting sold. The harvest quotas weren't getting met. And this year, the commission said, hey, it's making us look really bad that we're not charging a premium for this bear hunt. And they made it seem like this bear hunt was this super political, desirable thing. Oh, okay. And they're like, it's making us look bad, and when it makes it look like we don't have a value on our wildlife, and all these other states charge this much. It's like Montana charges this much, Wyoming charges this much, and it's like, well, Wyoming and Montana also have a spring bear season, and that's why they're selling their bear tags.
Yeah, sure.
So it was, to me, it was a political thing and a way to kind of get them to sell less tags.
Yeah, you think it's possible that that's just an anti-predator hunting sentiment just coming out through increased tags. Yeah. That's what I kind of figured.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. I think it's really unfortunate, because I do think that was, for how cheap it was, that was a nice tag for people to have. You know what
exactly.
I mean?
It was a nice add-on tag, and Parks and Wildlife staff tried to tell them, hey, that's what it is. Basically, it's the add-on. Not many people are coming out to Colorado just to hunt bears. It's because we don't have a spring bear season. If we had a spring bear season, it'd be completely different.
Yeah, sure.
But since we don't, people aren't coming out here in September to hunt bears. They are coming out here to hunt elk and deer.
Yeah, sure. Yet people got other things to do that they have a preference for during that same period of time.
Yep.
But all right, man, let's get back into the elk thing. So where we left it is, you've got these two alternatives. Now, if it goes where it's only limited for non-residents, do you have an idea, like, what the number of, like, how many fewer non-resident tags there are going to be in Colorado?
Yeah, they were just saying that they want to cut the amount of tags by about 10% off the beginning.
Yeah.
And whether that's going to totally hit the non-residents first, it depends on how it goes. But they said 10% of the total tags sold is kind of what they were looking at to go off from the beginning. It's not going to be a huge reduction.
Yeah,
it's not like they're going to come in. It's not like they're going to come in and say, 20% of the last 3 years is all that's going, or the 25% is what the resident non-resident split is now. It's not going to be nearly that drastic. It's going to be a very minor change, which I would like to point out. They have that in that document. It says 10% somewhere in there, and they spoke about it in testifying to the commission about it. But then their reasoning and some of the staff, when they're up there and they're talking about how, oh, it's how we can control how many tags are sold by going fully limited, and it's just the best management tool. It's like, well, you're only talking, and there's so many people that are buying them now. It's like, well, you're only talking about cutting out 10% here or 10% here. So how is that going to be a difference? They're kind of speaking against themselves on it when they spoke on it.
Yeah, so this is a question I have, Lane, and you might you may not even have an opinion on it, but it's interesting, man. So at the bottom of the 5-year of this structure, the notes, they have a table, right? And they actually have a table of the 10% reduction you're talking about. I think actually on a recent on a recent one of my episodes, I misquoted it as 5%, but you're correct. 10% is what they're saying they want to go. So I look at this table, man, and I know you're not looking at it, but what I see is that, like, right now, total archery over the counter tags is 33, or basically 33,600 across, all together. If they did the 10% reduction, and this would coincide with both resident and non-resident, the alternative one, let's call it. Because of the 75% resident and 25% non-resident allocation of tags, now that they're draw, basically you would have the 10% total reduction of 3,600 tags. But the way they break it down, like, the vast majority of that, Lane, would come from non-residents, like 3,200 of it.
Here's where they're wrong. And here's what they don't want to tell you on this. This is
just so people listening, because I know you got to answer, because I can see you sparked up. But let me finish so people understand what I'm looking at. So what they have here is 10% reduction for, this would be like 2025 or what they're saying. The resident tag allocation would go from 15,600 to 15,400, basically like 200 and change tag reduction. And then the non-resident tag allocation would go from 18,000 to 14,800. So that's like a 3,100 tag reduction, right? So the residents would only see a reduction in a couple hundred tags, right? So my intuition is looking at this, is that, why does it matter? Why not just cut them across the board for both residents and non-residents? Because what's 200 tags? So give it to me, Lane. I didn't mean to stop you. I just want to make sure.
No, you're good. Going on like the money, like as to what they're going to lose out. The 75-25 only split for resident, non-resident allocations only affects the first round of the draw.
Okay.
And so you're going to have people that are putting in for preference points, and that's your round one of the draw. And then this goes into the second. Most of these tags, historically, when that happened in 2019, 63% of those tags that got changed to a draw went to non-residents. So the state actually started making money instead of losing money off from it, if that makes sense. Because the 75-25 only affects the first round of the draw. It doesn't affect the second round. And they know a lot of people put in for preference points, or they're putting in for this harder to draw tag. So most of this is going to the second round. When it goes to the second round, a lot more non-residents apply than residents. Okay. And so a lot more of the tags go to non-residents than they go to residents. So like I said, I believe it was 62 or 63% of those units that went fully limited from the over-the-counter actually started being drawn by non-residents. So their revenue actually increased instead of them taking a revenue hit when they did it. Getting on the same thing as the revenue, when we changed the way that the draw structure is, Colorado used to have you to spend all the money, apply, and then instead of giving you just a refund on your credit card, they would issue a refund check. And they were spending some ridiculous number. I believe it was $4 to $5 million a year issuing refund checks.
Right.
And so when they switched into the draw to where now you just pay like the $10 like tag application fee, but you had to buy the qualifying license. That first year they did it, their revenue went up over 20%. The next year, the very next year, it went up almost 20% again. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife revenue, all of a sudden they found themselves with this surplus of money. I believe it was like $56 million they had in surplus, that they were like, holy hell,
Sure.
like we're making all this money now. We don't know what to do with it. That was the time that this cut should have been made. That's when we were really pushing for these cuts. Like, hey, you're worried about the money? Let's make the cuts now. Well,
Right.
the state has a thing, and I believe it's a state law. I could be a little bit wrong on this, but I know the state put pressure on them. Like, hey, you have this extra money. We need money somewhere else. Either find a way to spend it or we're going to take it. So in the last meeting, when they were getting their budget, they said, hey, how much of that $56 million surplus do we have left? And they're like, a couple million isn't spoken
Yeah.
for, but the rest of it we've already spent.
Yeah.
So they had the opportunity to do this. They had a surplus of 56 million. And by the way, if you look at the tag sales from like 2 years ago, I think last year's aren't available. Like, and you just do the math for over-the-counter archery elk tag sales, they only brought in $18 million for non-residents. We're talking about we had 56 million. You could have cut out all of the non-resident tag sales, and I'm not an advocate for that at all.
Yeah.
But they talk about this money. They talk about the money issue. But fiscally, they've been extremely irresponsible with the $56 million, partially because they were told they had to be.
Yeah. I got you. So that I totally understand what you're saying, Lane, is that they missed an opportunity, probably for the sake of the resource, for the quality of the hunt. They could have reduced non-resident tags at that time, and they wouldn't have had to deal with the big
the financial loss.
Yeah, which is obviously an issue, right? Like it's
a huge issue.
Yeah,
it is a
like,
huge issue because we are what funds. Am I muted? Oh no, sorry.
No.
We are what funds like the wildlife conservation here in the state. We are we are the leader in it, and I want us to continue to be the leader in that.
Right. So yeah. So explain to me though here, if I'm understanding it wrong, Lane, with this reduction in non-resident.
What table are you looking at?
Yeah, dude. So if you go down, it's table 1.
All the way to table 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's page 26.
Yep.
Or on the PDF, it's page
C3, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the blue, and then 2 rows down, total reduced by 10%.
I'm literally looking at the line that's labeled 6A1. See that?
Yep. And then total reduced by 10%.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I'm sorry. 6. Yeah. The second line there. So that's what I'm looking at. So I see on the revenue front, I totally understand the opportunity missed, right? So I guess in your opinion, is what they're saying here in terms of revenue they're going to lose, or how these tags are going to look. Do you have a disagreement with this projection related to that?
Yeah, a little bit. I think they're trying to put the worst case scenario in there, in my opinion.
Oh, so you think there's going to actually be that a lot of these non-resident tags that come out, the revenue is going to show back up, is like they're going to get them as second choice or that.
Well, one thing that's not accounted for in this one, and I believe it's not accounted for, is right now to buy an over-the-counter elk tag in Colorado, you don't need to buy a qualifying license. If you go to a draw, and if the non-residents now, if you look at that, they're reduced by 10%, right?
Mm-hmm.
They now have to buy a qualifying license. That cheapest qualifying license for a non-resident, I believe, I could be wrong, is like $60 for like whatever a Colorado like spring turkey tag is, would be the cheapest qualifying license. So at a minimum, you're making them spend an extra $60 to buy the qualifying license. Most people are going to buy the small game license, which is $180.
Okay.
So you just required every non-resident that wants to keep hunting here now to buy that qualifying license, and you just increased that tag by $180.
Yeah.
That's not accounted for in that chart. And if they do the same thing to residents, you just took a resident and made them buy a small game license or a turkey tag, which is a qualifying license. And this is all something I don't agree with that was talked about in the commission. This was brought up in the last commission meeting. And the commissioner that was kind of for this and trying to fight it pointed out the cheapest not the cheapest resident qualifying license, which is $40. It's a $39 spring turkey tag, and then decided to point out the most expensive non-resident qualifying
Right.
license, saying, "Oh, well, it's a lot worse for the non-residents." It's like, spring turkey tag doesn't cost that much
Right.
for a non-resident. But you didn't point out that my small game fee just went up to, I believe, $69 or something crazy for a small game tag here in Colorado now.
For a resident.
Yeah, for a resident. So now I'm going to have to buy that and apply for the tag. So, which is a $10 fee. So you just took me from having a $60 elk license to $110, just like that. That's if
Oh,
I'm buying the
yeah.
cheapest. If
Yeah,
I'm
I see.
buying the small game license, you just took me to $130 to get my what used to be a $60 over the counter elk tag. Now the cheapest I can get it for is $130 because I have to have that qualifying license. That's not accounted for in that. They're going to have a revenue surplus or increase from this. They're not going to have a decrease if they only do it by the 10%.
Yeah, so you're bringing up some interesting stuff, man. I guess, and I think it's because you have some historical understanding, Lane, that
I've just dedicated way too much time and effort into it.
well, yeah, well, it's hard. I think my conclusion, like listening to your perspective on this, is like, look, they have these projection. Like I would think, and I think a lot of people would look at this and they're going to be like, well, they've got the data, they can project what revenue is going to look like when they make these changes because it's pretty easy to do that, right? It's just like easy
Yep.
spreadsheet math. But there's a lot of there's a behavioral thing that we can't figure out, right? Like what are these, how are these going to change the behavior of people, right? Are they going to substitute
Yep.
other hunts, do certain things in the draw? There's going to be some of that. So it's hard for us to speculate what that's going to look like. And then there's these other factors, revenue factors like the license, the fact that now they're having to do the draw instead of just buying over the counter tag. So
Yep.
I totally see what you're saying. Basically, the effects on revenue are more unpredictable than one would think. That's my
Yep.
conclusion. I'm not prepared to do this in any way because I haven't really looked at it from that perspective. I'm trying to think if there's really, any factors where it could, where they could see more reduction. The opposite of what you're saying. Are there some factors that could occur that they see more of a reduction than they're speculating in terms of revenue? And the only thing I can think of really, Lane, is that I mean, this is kind of outside of this, but any sort of collapse of the brand of elk hunting, collapse of the actual research from a biological standpoint or something like that, that would be like a mass that would overshadow what we're talking about here drastically, right? And that's kind of outside of this conversation, but I think that's like one thing that both residents and non-residents in Colorado should probably think about, that like, man, if in the short term it's always about revenue, it could really like be major in like the
Yeah.
mid
And
to long term.
I there's great people at Parks and Wildlife staff. I mean, I really agree strongly with a lot of the people that are there with a lot of it, and they try
Sure.
to put the right things with the right focus, but they're putting so much on their plate right now outside of the wildlife and with what we're doing with the outdoor recreation here, and they just keep getting more and more added to their plate to where the revenue has to be part of it, but they're not scared historically to make the cuts that need to happen when it comes to the budget. I think it was 1999 is when they went full draw for deer, and
Sure.
that did cut non-residents out, a vast number of non-residents out, and it cut their revenue from tags substantially. So in the past, they've proven they're not scared to do that. But at the same time, we're 25 years later, it's a different political climate. And are some of those people actually willing to do that? I know a lot of the staff that believe in the North American model for wildlife conservation are willing to do that. But I think there's some of them in there too that are worried. And I'd be worried too if something was coming up that was wanting to try to like reduce my budget, and they're already asking me to do more, and I'm already stressed out, and I'm already working 60-hour weeks on a 40-hour week paycheck and not getting overtime for it or whatever. Like, I'd be worried too. But at the same time, I mean, we're putting in solar charging stations at state wildlife areas right now. Like, the state wildlife area is paid for by hunting dollars. How many hunters are driving a Tesla to go hunt?
Yeah.
Or
there's like
how many paddle boarders are taking theirs to enjoy a state wildlife area that's paid for by hunting dollars, and then complaining about the hunters being there and not having a place to charge their Tesla.
Yeah, yeah. So
So it's like, where are the priorities here, and how is that money getting skewed?
yeah. And man, like you're so good at taking me off on like another subject, Lane.
Sorry, I'm
So
really good at finding rabbit
no.
holes.
So this is like a good, this is important though, because I think the biggest argument, so the biggest argument that a non-resident's going to say to you on this is like, just cut it across the board. Why would you want to deter non-residents because of the revenue they bring in to the state, right? I mean, I'm sure you've heard that argument, right?
Yep.
You've already talked about some suggestions of why that may or may not be true. Now, one question I have though is like, what actually happens in Colorado, and if there's not enough revenue, right? Like what happens if there was something catastrophic to the elk herd and all of a sudden there was half as much revenue from elk?
Oh, you mean
right?
like wolves?
Yeah, exactly. So like that occurs, right? So what is that? What actually happens next step? And like structurally, has it already happened? Like, because there's already this convolution of like parks and wildlife with like, really like the fish and game component of it. So does it really change in any way, man? Like, what does that actually look like if, the hunter funding mechanism breaks down there?
That's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you. I
Yeah.
do think that we rely way too much on the non-resident instead of the hunter when it comes to it. If you want to look at the numbers, Colorado, like, let me pull this up really quick because I got a photo of this chart
When you
that
say,
talks about like how much we rely on hunting dollars, especially when it comes to non-residents versus residents.
yeah.
Colorado, we have
okay.
280,000 elk, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Montana, Oregon, Wyoming, Idaho, New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona, they have 742,000 elk combined.
Yeah.
We have 280, but we sold 72,000 non-resident elk tags last year, or I think it was a couple years ago in 2022. And all those other states combined that have double the elk herd as us only sold 66,000 non-resident elk tags.
Yeah.
So do we have a problem of relying on the non-resident? Yeah, we have a huge issue with relying on the non-resident for our funding mechanism. But how long are the non-residents going to continue to come hunt here if our elk herd goes to shit?
Yeah.
And that's what I tried saying 3 years ago, is like, we are draining the resource. And if you have a crappy hunt, they're going to stop coming. And what happens when they stop coming? And just because we give them a higher allocation, people are going to be like, no, screw that stand. I ain't going to hunt there. It sucks. And I've had people come with me. I got non-residents come hunt with me every year. They're friends. And almost every single year when we're in when we're in an over-the-counter unit, guys are like, I'm tapping out. I'm done. I'm not coming back for this crap. I'd much rather just go hunt Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, wherever I can draw every 2 or 3 years. And I'm cutting out Colorado. I might apply and I'll come every 5 years, but I ain't doing this again because this hunt was miserable.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been trying to say for the past at least 5 years, of like, if we don't get ahead of this now, it's going to be a horrible, miserable experience. Because for elk hunting, it is the experience for most people. It's not the kill. It's not the harvesting meat. It's the experience of the elk hunt. And you're not paying this much money to come out here and just go camp with 20 other camps and not see an animal or only see one elk a day. Like, if I just want to do that, I just go camping.
Yeah. I think you brought up like a lot of several points in there, Lane, that I think, so I totally agree with you that the mechanism needs to change. I think I'll talk about elk specifically, and then I'll actually touch on mule deer too, my thoughts on this. Like on elk in particular, I think totally the mechanism of basically the whole thing being funded by really non-resident, easy to draw or over-the-counter tags. That's really the funding mechanism. When you really like break it all down, I don't know what the percentage of revenue is, but it's a huge chunk. But the other stuff is all little chunks, right? The big chunk is that, right? And it's been structured that way for the exact reason you're talking about. It's much more than any other state. It's provided a ton of opportunity and therefore revenue generation off of that. So I totally agree with you that as it looks right now, that has to structurally change. I think that we got here actually for good reason. If you look at it historically, I think that for decades, man, like when I was a little kid and my dad was a cattle rancher in Colorado, the world, like the Colorado world, was so much different. The elk herd was crazy productive. And
Yep.
my personal belief, and it's a history that I think is really been fogged and maybe intentionally, like swept under the rug, is Colorado had decades of heavy predator suppression. I mean, elk herds
Yep.
were like, an elk herd could like, you could pound an elk herd and it would be back in 3 years. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And therefore it was a resource that could produce this, a lot of opportunity. So obviously they built their business model around that, and that's their brand. And I think that's the specific thing that you talk about to me is a huge danger that Colorado faces. And I think they're already on the verge of it, man, that if you lose the brand of, like that's a, they're, those hunts are still fun. Like, sure, maybe you're not going to go kill big bulls, but those hunts are still fun. If they lose that brand, it might take a while, but that revenue is going to get crushed. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I actually think in an analogous way, in my opinion, due to the same thing, Colorado's mule deer, like what's the brand of Colorado mule deer? It's big deer. You know what I mean? Like people go to Colorado to hunt big deer. And I've had discussions with, guys, state guys and stuff that didn't really agree with, like, they were like, well, what's the big deal? Like, why don't we just do, more late season hunts or reduce the age class or whatever? And I always thought, man, like, if all of a sudden Colorado doesn't produce big mule deer, like what does that actually look like for the business model of it? I think that, I
Yep.
don't think they look at that, man. I don't think that's considered. So yeah, that's my rant on it. I don't know if you agree or disagree or.
No, I don't agree with that. Like almost wholeheartedly of that. Like
Yeah.
if we don't have a quality hunt to offer, people are going to stop hunting here. Like
Yeah.
it's not like what, why would I come hunt when I can just come camping?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it doesn't cost me money to come camp. It doesn't cost me the $800, $1,000 tags and stuff to come camp when I'll just come rent a camper from somebody and do it for a couple $100.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. No, I totally agree on that front. But yeah, man, I guess the one thing we haven't hit on, Lane, I haven't really given you the chance, is just give me your perspective on the alternative too, which is limiting non-residents, but not residents. What are like if somebody's going to ask you just like, hey, why is that fair? What would be your bullet points on it?
I think the biggest thing that people come at me with on this one is like these elk live on national forest. So it's my elk. Like they live on my national forest. I should get to hunt them. I can look at my front yard right here. I have elk that come and tear at my trees every single day.
Yeah.
I don't get to shoot them because they live on my property. That's not the way that America model for wildlife works. That's not the way that we treat our animals. These animals are owned by the people, and their management is entrusted to each and every state. And when you live in that state that is entrusted to their management, then you get that's your state's resource. You should have priority on your state's resource. And I 100%, I've wrote in stuff for Alaska to keep opportunities open to Alaska residents, but limit myself as a non-resident hunter. I've talked to a lot of other people about other states, and I'm not going to use that just because everybody else is doing it's right. But Arizona just limited their over-the-counter deer sales for non-residents and kept them open for residents. I've been hunting there the past 2 years. Dude, it is a night and day difference hunt. I'm going to try to get that tag every single year. Whereas 5 years ago, it's like, I ain't coming back here. It sucks. All I'm seeing is people. Now I'm going out there. I'm only seeing deer, dude. It's awesome. That's a Nebraska for whitetail. We're talking about an animal that insurance companies look as a nuisance that increase your insurance rates and stuff. Just limited non-resident deer tags. And by the way, the price is ridiculous. Sure. It's more expensive to go hunt a deer in Kansas, and I can't go buy an over-the-counter deer tag in Kansas as a non-resident where you can as a resident. And every other state, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, you can go buy an over-the-counter tag as a resident, but not as a non-resident.
Right.
It's because that wildlife is the management of that wildlife is entrusted to the state. It's owned by the people of the state, and they should have preference there because they're dealing with them tearing up their front yard. You
Yeah,
know, their tax dollars are also helping pay for other things within their management. They're helping pay for that, for the roads that get up there to give you the access to it. They're voting for on the people that are actually taking care of them. They are caring about, and I'll say this 100%. There's a lot of hunters that care about the land, but there's some people that come in and they're like, I don't live here. I'll never live. I'll never come back here again. I don't care about it. And they're going to trash it a lot more than what a resident does. I'm hiking up into these mountains and I'm clearing trails all summer long when I'm scouting. I'm not just showing up for a 7-day hunt, doing everything I need to do, taking what I can and leaving. I'm back in there nonstop, taking care of these lands and doing what I can for the resource. My money that I'm donating is staying here in the state to help fund it. There's a lot more to it than just because it's on my property, I want to be able to shoot it. That's not the way it works, and that's not right.
Yeah.
I will never get to shoot an elk that lives on my property. I mean, it takes 5 years
Sure.
to draw this tag. I probably will never get a chance. I just get to
Yeah.
go watch them tear up the trees that I plant as soon as I take down the cage around, you know, and
Yeah.
that's cool. That's my choice because I choose to live here. This is my state. I have a lot of pride in my state. I should have an opportunity for it. And I've told people before, as soon as your state tries to limit your opportunity to go, and a lot of these people are whitetail hunters. Like as soon as your state tries to limit your opportunity to hunt your deer in your backyard, the same way they're going to limit mine as a non-resident, I'll be the guy that's showing up on Zoom to talk and say, hey, this is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. You should give preference to the people that are having if you look at an insurance company, these animals are a nuisance. I don't view them as a nuisance, but there are downsides to dealing with wildlife with where you live. And you should have a little bit of a priority within that. And it doesn't matter if they live on national forest or not.
Yeah, and in for the sake of the conversation we're having today, Lane, you're not talking that there's anything specifically limiting residents tag availability other than the fact that more and more non-resident tags are reducing the quality. In the sense it's the same thing, man. But I want to make sure that there's not something I missed that I don't understand. So yeah, I get it. Is that it's reducing the residents' opportunity by obviously affecting the quality. So, dude, I think your argument, I can't argue with what you just said, Lane, but I maybe tell me if any of what I'm about to say is wrong. But I think it's interesting for viewers to understand this, that the case law around property, or the ownership of wildlife is pretty clear. Like you just made a lot of different points about being a resident that some of them were really just a fairness thing, right? Like you're paying taxes in the state, that sort of thing. You're really talking about fairness issues. But I think that people do have to understand the actual case law, you know, and it's super extensive, man. Like I don't know if you've ever read it, but 100%, it's gone to all the high courts, you know, over and over again. There's a bunch of different cases. It's pretty much solidified that the residents of the state own the wildlife in that state through the state owns it in trust for them, right? So in a sense, anytime, it doesn't really matter. Like it really doesn't matter, like the fairness or whatever. That's just like basically like property ownership in the US. That's how it is legally. So it's interesting to me because my personal take on it, if you know, if I was looking at it from a non-resident, is like, man, the funding mechanism is really important because basically if Colorado residents want the CPW to be funded well, to take care of that wildlife resource, they need to essentially, this is just in a sense like an analogy, but they're essentially selling some of their ownership of the state wildlife to non-residents. That's really the mechanism that's going on here. And that's why there's a difference in non-resident tag price, whatever, right? That's why we can justify that. And so I guess, you know, if I was a non-resident, I'd be like, we've already talked about it, but that's one of the issues, right? Like, is this funding mechanism going to break down? And like all the Colorado residents can crap on non-residents, but if that breaks down, is it going to be bad for them long term? I think you've probably already answered that, Lane, but do you have any comments on that part
Yeah,
of
my
this?
comment on is I 100% agree with the non-residents and their funding, the way we use them. I don't want to cut out all non-residents.
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing that most people like. They see,
Yeah.
hey, we're going to limit non-resident tags. They're like, you're getting rid of non-resident tags. I don't want to see non-resident tags go away.
Yeah.
Most of the people I hunt with are non-residents that come here to hunt with me. I
Sure.
got my core group of like resident buddies that I hunt with, but then we all have friends that live all across the states. I got friends from Germany that I'm trying to get to come hunt here.
Yeah.
Like, I love the non-resident hunter. Like, I love what they do for the state. I love what they do but at some point we need to put a cap on this.
Yeah.
And we need to make it at least fair for the residents, to where I don't want it to be the same allocation split as Wyoming. I don't want it to be New Mexico. I am proud to say that our state gives out more non-resident elk tags than any other state. It looks like it more, all the other states combined.
Sure.
That's pretty dang cool.
Yeah.
Like, that's something we can be proud of, but there's got to be a cap on it somewhere. And at some point, if you look at the population density of Colorado versus the population density of Wyoming and Montana, and how many people are like here, like, less tags are going. Like, it's harder to draw a resident elk tag in Colorado than it is in Wyoming, because we have a lot more people here that are residents and a lot more people applying. So just because we have more elk and we're giving away more elk tags doesn't mean that it's easy for the resident.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to keep that balanced. And as more people move here and there's more hunters that move here, the the demand for resident tags goes up. And we're trying, I'm trying to keep it a little bit on an even playing field. The 75-25 split, while keeping the 80-20, I think is a great place to start. I don't want to see the 75-25 apply to over-the-counter tags. I would like to see it cut down and just have a cap of like, hey, we're not selling any more than this. If you just came out right now and you said no more than 50% of the tags will go to non-residents, you'd be cutting out 15% of our non-resident elk tags right now.
Right.
Because last year, I said 15, it's actually 13. I believe it was 63% of our tags, like 2 years ago, went to non-residents for over-the-counter archery elk tags.
Right.
What other state is that okay?
Yeah.
Like, I just want a cap. It has to, like, otherwise we're going to keep getting flooded. And it's going to be bad for our elk.
Yeah. No, I it's hard for me to disagree with that. Like, so you're not, I'm sure that when I post this, man, like there'll be some non-residents that the standard arguments, but everything you said, Lane,
and so far, everybody that I've talked to has been pretty cool and level-headed about it. There's been some crazy people that I've talked to too. They're like, you should just make the whole state over the counter. Go back to when it was over the counter. I'm like, you can't realistically do that. Well, it works in Missouri. Like, buddy, like, we're not even talking about apples and oranges. We're talking about pineapples and freaking oak trees or something, man.
Yeah.
Like, that's completely different. We can't do that. Like, I wish we lived in the good old days where we could have over the counter for everything? Heck yeah, that'd be great. We just don't have that anymore. So as long as most of the level-headed people, dude, I am more than open to talk to people, hear different suggestions. My attitude on this has changed so much in just the past 3 years. Because I do care about the non-resident perspective. I care about what my buddies in New York that want to come out here and hunt think. I care about my friends from Wyoming that want to come down and hunt. I care about my buddy Josh coming from California to hunt. Like, I want them to come out here and have the quality hunt. And at the same time, we apply for all these other states and we want it to be a quality hunt there too. But just because I'm spending more money in Wyoming should not give me more of a reason to draw an elk tag there. Heck, I was born and raised there. That doesn't give me any preference there. I can't even go hunt a wilderness unit in Wyoming right now because I'm a non-resident.
Right.
Not unless I'm with a guide. It's why are you picking on us here in Colorado?
Yeah. Dude, it's I'm with you, man. The other part of that whole deal, and I think you're supportive of this, Lane, is that I do think that this doesn't change what you've said in terms of like fairness. Maybe being more aligned with the other states is not a bad thing, but in Colorado specifically, there's a part of me that is touchy about pushing back on non-residents a whole lot, like I said, I don't think you're really pushing back. You're just saying that you don't want it to be, worse and worse progressively in the future. And one thing I will say is, like, when I look at the math, Lane, these two alternatives in terms of, tags that actually are taken from non-residents in the short term, there's very little difference. You know what I mean? Like, mathematically, I mean, just so people out there understand, like, at least until something drastic happens with the elk herd, or they reduce all the tags by 40, 50% or whatever, the difference between alternative 1 and alternative 2 in terms of what, the reduction in non-resident tags, it's actually very close. It's almost the exact same mathematically.
Yep.
But the thing, the one thing I was going to touch on was that, man, like, one thing that Colorado gets from non-residents is they get some political support, I think, on issues. Like, if you look at the lion thing right now, obviously they can't vote in Colorado. They can't, there is a non-resident, but they can support, the different organizations that are working on that specific issue, right? And I think
like
a lot,
Coloradoans for Responsible Wildlife Management.
I think a lot of the money going to Dan and them is from non-residents. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So I don't think you disagree with that, but I do think that a lot of non-residents look at it that way, Lane. They look at, like, hey man, like, I'm trying to support Colorado, in all their issues, and they're left leaning, so a lot of these issues are a big issue for them. I'm trying to support them from the outside, and look, they come back and they want to cut non-resident tax, right? Yeah, a lot of guys have this perspective. So
100%.
I don't think that clashes with anything you've already said. I don't know. Do you have any comments on that?
I totally get it. I'm glad you brought that up. I think the fact that we are the battleground and the testing state for this, we lost out on wolves by less than 1%.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Right. And people saw that. And I think that this ballot initiative that is being proposed right now is ballot initiative 91. It's going to change if it actually makes it on the ballot when they get the signatures. That's going to be a standard. I think the big thing to push here and to show that yes, you're helping support Colorado, but in the end, you're helping support yourself at the same time with that, is if this wins here and they see that it works in Colorado, they're going to do it in Nebraska, and they're going to do it in New Mexico, and they're going to do it in Arizona, and then they're going to do it in Montana. And if you think it's not going to happen in Wyoming, all you need is 60,000 people to move there to swing that state. Sure. So it's going to happen in Wyoming. It's going to happen everywhere else. And they're going to start putting all these ballot initiatives on there, and they're going to start putting all this money. They're going to be coming after your hunting in those states as well. So if we don't stop it here, the only good news, and the reason why, like, if you're going to be putting money here in Colorado and we kick them in the teeth here, and because they've already said they have over $30 million that they want to commit to this fight to ban mountain lion hunting here in Colorado. 30 million. If they spend 30 million here and we kick them in the teeth and we can get them to lose by 65 or 70%, they ain't going to try that in your home state. They're not going to come for it where you're at. They're going to have to change their tactics, and they're going to sit back. We're going to put them on the defense, and they're going to be like, oh, shoot, we have to change this up, because they rally and they all stand together.
Yeah.
That's where this is a little bit different in there, of like, hey, I'm helping save your hunting. No, you're helping save your hunting. You're saving your home state. You're saving Kentucky. You're saving Georgia. You're saving North Carolina's deer hunting and the attacks on your hunting there next, because after they ruin it here, they're going to come ruin it there. So that's where that's different.
Yeah. Well, and the other component, I totally agree with all that, Lane. The other component of it is, even if they go with alternative 2 on this particular subject or whatever, still Colorado is going to be, for the whatever foreseeable future, is going to have more elk, non-resident elk, nominally more non-resident elk hunts than anywhere else combined. So it's still
100%. And I want it to stay that way. As much as I'm saying, like, non-resident versus resident, I want it to stay that way, because I like being able to plan elk hunts with my buddies that live in other states. One of my best friends down in Texas, I got 2 of them down there actually. I want them to come hunt with me as much as possible. And if we go to a 90-10 resident, non-resident tag allocation, that means that they can't hunt with me for every other 6 years instead of every 3.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, I
sure.
don't want that at all.
Yeah.
Actually, I got, dude. And if you want to talk about non-residents, I got a aunt and uncle that started applying for elk tags here in Colorado 27 years ago. And then the point creep and the point creep and the point creep has screwed them to where last year he finally changed up where he was hunting, applied for a different hunt, and ended up shooting an elk about the size of this one that my wife shot here. He was
Yeah.
stoked with it, but it's not what he started out applying for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Watching the point creep just completely hose them is what has actually been heartbreaking for the past 8 years that we've been trying to get them to draw this tag.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you want to think that I'm not sympathetic to the non-resident, I'm extremely sympathetic to the non-resident. In fact, 2 years ago, my uncle that was drawn for that almost didn't get to hunt this tag. He died on the operating table. That's how
Yeah,
long
yeah.
he's waited to come to Colorado to hunt elk again. So I am extremely sympathetic to the non-resident. I want the non-resident to have
Yeah, sure.
opportunities here. And I do brag on the fact that we give out more tags than all these other states. So
Yeah, and I think
it's not,
that's
Yeah.
gonna be the case for a while. I get it, man. And just so you know, anybody listening to this or watching this knows, like, you're a pretty even keel resident, honestly, Lane. Like, I know a lot of guys, you know, that are like, they could care. Like, there's a lot of guys that they're like, not necessarily just in Colorado, the resident of Western states, that really feel like there shouldn't be non-resident tags, period. And the thing
yeah.
that's
And I don't agree with that at all.
yeah, the thing that's crazy about it, you know, back to the discussion of the actual law, I don't see anything, you know, that would legally stop that. It's actually
You
kind
know
of
what?
it's kind of
So
interesting.
I haven't dug into that like really a ton, but if you listen to the last Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting, there's a guy, Siegfried, that gets up there and testifies for like 10 minutes, and then they
Mhm.
start asking him questions. And Commissioner Tushkin, who I believe is an attorney,
Yeah.
points something out to him saying that there is an overturn of somewhere that it is still like a national resource. I need to dive into that more
Yeah,
because
so
he points something out, and this guy has like no response to it. He's like, I don't know, I'm not a come with something else. And he's like, well, you just said it. You're not a lawyer. And I'm just telling you about a case law that overturns what you're saying, blah, blah, blah.
yeah.
So it
So
would be interesting to look into because even if, let's say, even if he's right, wildlife of the US belongs to the citizens of the US, it's still entrusted to each individual state to manage it. And
right.
when that happens and it's entrusted to the state, they should still be doing something to benefit the state.
Yeah. And
And then the residents that lie where it within their
yeah, and what Tushin's talking about, man, is this is a very and we can end on this, man, because I've taken so much of your time
Sweet.
already. But
Oh, you're good, dude.
there's a history of being some exceptions to this. And a lot of them are, you know, there's been exceptions to it when it comes to waterfowl. You know, there's like practical issues with you know, the state trust kind of doctrine around ownership for the residents, because it's like, well, what if an elk walks from New Mexico onto the Hickory Apache reservation, right? Now, like, who owns it, right? Because it's not only does it go to a different state, it goes to a different, you know, it goes into a sovereign place. So it's like all these little like end cases that become issues. And for certain species, there's been exceptions to it. And that's what he's talking about. And that kind of creates like, what they want to do is they want to create a little like maybe sense, right? Because, man, guys like him, other guys would love for there to be more federal. That's one thing that you got to be like, this is a very interesting concept to dive into, particularly as a non-resident. They would love it to flip to more federal control, because our whole world would change as we know it as hunters if it became federal law, because you know, or you know, that ownership doctrine, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not using the right terms. Changed, it'd be a whole different world, man. And I think a lot of folks would actually like that. A lot of the non-hunting folks would like that. So they try to like say, oh, there's like a little hole in that, right? That we might be able to go, but I don't know. You know what I mean? It's
Yep.
who knows? But it's you know, right now it seems to be working, and there's good arguments on both, you know, both sides of the table in terms, but the law right now is what it is, right? So, and I think that's what, you know, all these state game departments are going off of. But Yeah, man. I appreciate your take on everything, Lane. I thought we were gonna disagree more, but I liked it, dude. We got into a bunch of good topics. Do you, just to tell everybody where they can follow you. If there's anything that you want to put out there in terms of, the groups you're working with or any of that on this particular subject, go for it, man.
I'm doing a lot of stuff with the Colorado Bowhunters Association. I think I don't know if we talked about it in the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Liaison for the CBA, which makes me an executive board member with there. We're trying to do a lot of good stuff, and we're trying to do what's best for the wildlife of Colorado. My views on this are not 100% CBA views, but I do try to
Sure.
differentiate that when I do testify and stuff, speaking on behalf of Colorado bow hunters. But yeah, my Instagram's R2Lane. That's about it. I do have a YouTube channel where I put some hunting films up there. I do film for different hunting shows and stuff. I was producing Derek Wolf's podcast, the Wolf Untamed podcast, which is kind of a fun one to do.
Okay.
But we just brought in Ironclad to start taking that over and running it, because I'm just running so many different directions and stuff. I'm really excited to see what Ironclad does, bringing in and taking over that baby. But I'm still going to be filming some of his hunts, and starting a new company called Rucklist, which we should be launching in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and that's going to be fun. I'm excited to look at that. So yeah, just all over the place. But R2Lane Instagram is the main one, and then Lane Walter Productions on YouTube is the other cool thing there. So
Awesome, man. I'm not gonna let you get off so easy. Can you give like the short and sweet on what Rucklist is? I'm just curious, man.
dude, I'm excited about Rucklist. It hasn't launched yet. It's going to be start as a web interface app and go into a straight app that's going to hopefully change the game when it comes to you packing for your elk hunt, and not just your elk hunt, but any of your backcountry adventures, whether it be backpacking, hiking, mountain biking, going into rock climbing. We're trying to just make it a lot easier for you to plan your whatever your adventure is going to be. And then going into just, if you're an outfitter and you're having clients come in, being able to tell them exactly what they need to be. You're going to be able to build out a whole pack for them. And then if you say, hey, I want you to show up with this kind of gear, you're going to be able to build out that list. They're going to be able to click on it, and it's going to take them to a link to either just buy that and then put it in their list right there, and make it a lot easier, if that makes sense. And then if we're going on a group hunt, we can go through and we can make, this is what I'm going to have in my pack, and this is what you're going to have in your pack, and you can see exactly what I'm taking. So if we need to move stuff around and like cut out weight, we're going to be able to show your exact weight on that as well. I'm really excited about it, man. It's going to be really cool.
Sure. Yeah,
so
it really
we got the
like
funding. We're hoping for a May launch date. We'll see how that comes along on the backside of getting everything put out and stuff, but at least a soft launch in May or June.
Nice, man. It's like a utility for managing all your gear lists and whatever else.
100%.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm sure you have pack lists on your phone all over.
Oh yeah.
This is just going to put everything in one spot for you and just help you out.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's so much repetition in that and all that. So that totally makes sense, man. Look forward to checking out. It's a cool name too, man. I like it.
I'm excited for it. I'm just one of the really small members of it. Brian,
cool.
who actually lives by me, is the one that he was on a hunt. He forgot something. He's like, damn it, I wish there was a way that like you could have helped me double check this, that I forgot my damn toothbrush.
Yeah, sure.
So
no, cool, man.
Yeah.
Cool concept. Well, thanks, Lane. I appreciate you having the conversation with me, man.
Yeah, super appreciative of you having me on, man.
Good deal.